The talk in the offseason about Georgia's offense was that it was going to maybe be a little bit better. Why? Because Carson Beck is a year older, and now he's got another year. He's got a year under his belt as a starting quarterback for Georgia. He's fifth-year senior, right? They went out and they got a lot of weapons. They went out and they got, over the last 2 years, Dominic Lovett and London Humphreys, Kobe Young, Michael Jackson III. There are a ton of receivers. There's been development with the other guys they have, the Dylan Bells. Anthony Evans is a guy that they're working on developing. Arian Smith has been around for a long time. New running back room. Heading into the season, Georgia's offense was getting put on a pedestal. I'm one of the people that had my hands underneath that and was lifting it up myself. Through 3 games, Georgia's offense has been, right? That's the way I would describe it. One really good half against Clemson, one really bad half against Clemson. Pretty solid game against Tennessee Tech, and then a really bad offensive performance against Kentucky. Well, Kirby Smart thinks that it's pretty obvious Georgia's weapons on offense aren't as good as they were a year ago. Who'd they have a year ago? They had a couple of running backs that are trying to stay on rosters, and Dejan Edwards and Keldon Milton, but they also had a second-round pick, Ladd McConkey, who is a starter for the Los Angeles Chargers, who's already caught a touchdown in the NFL. And Brock Bowers, of course, one of the best Georgia players ever, one of the best college football players ever. Certainly, in my opinion, the best college football tight end of all time. And he's up there for that, even if you don't agree with me there. And those guys are the ones that were successful against Alabama. Kirby, I want to go ahead and jump into what Kirby had to say. I want to go back to something that Nick Saban said this past offseason when NFL GMs were calling him and asking him about certain guys, and really think about, hey, is Georgia's offensive weapon room good enough to beat this Alabama team? I'm a little bit more confident in the defense. I'm going to talk about the defense a little bit more in another video, but I think through 3 games and just with everything we know, the biggest question heading into it, at least from a media standpoint, and probably the fans too, is this offense going to score enough to beat the Crimson Tide? Because the Crimson Tide can score. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post newsletter. I've got that in the description of this video down below. I'll say thank you for signing up for that. I want to go ahead and not waste your time. Let's talk about what Kirby had to say on Georgia's offensive weapons. Quote unquote. I wouldn't say there's the star power. Brock Bowers is not playing. That's pretty obvious. A second-round pick and a first-round pick are no longer in those roles. I don't know that we have the depth because everybody we have now we had last year. They played a different role last year. All the guys now, their roles have been elevated. We've got a lot of guys that can play moving parts. We had some additions. Kobe Young, London Humphreys. Humphreys obviously not playing in this game. And some young guys came along. It's a different group. You're a different team every year. We lost something when we lost Darnell Washington. Ain't that the truth? We lost something when we lost Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt. You replace that and you try to make up for it in every area you can. You've got the players you've got, and the ones we've got I'm very pleased with. I'm happy with the guys we got. We do a good job executing with the ones that we do have. That's what he had to say about Georgia's offensive weapon. Obviously, he ends that with on a positive note, talking about how he likes the players, and when he's not going to go up there and say, look, we just don't have good football players, because that's not the case at the University of Georgia. But when you think about one of the biggest differences for Georgia on offense, it was having a superstar. Things are easier on offense when you have a superstar. Georgia had Stetson Bennett, who was essentially a superstar, and Brock Bowers, who was a bona fide superstar at the same time. They had Brock Bowers a year ago in 2017 when Georgia was competing for a national championship. Obviously, they lose to Alabama in the game. They had multiple superstars on that offense in Nick Chubb and Sony Michel that carried their offense. Before that, 2012, another team that was competing for a national championship, they had a superstar freshman running back, Todd Gurley, and they had an older quarterback that was one of the best in college football in Aaron Murray. But you see my point. Georgia's best years, they have high-end talent on offense. Well, this was a discussion over the offseason. Brock Bowers isn't going to be there. Ladd McConkey, a guy who, not quite a superstar, but a star in college football, a guy that makes a lot of big-time plays and is important for Georgia, they're gone. Georgia's got to replace that. There are 2 people, let's say 2.5 people, that people pointed to heading into this year and saying, that there's your answer. Carson Beck. We'll have that conversation. Carson Beck. heading into the season, considered by many to be the best quarterback in college football, to be the guy that's going to be the first pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Those things are still on the table. I don't think Carson Beck has looked like the best quarterback in college football through 3 weeks of football. And personally, if I was an NFL GM, not just Carson, I don't think I would draft any of these quarterbacks with a first overall pick unless the situation is that drastic. That's how I feel about the quarterback play in college football, and obviously Carson Beck falls under that umbrella. He's been good, right? He hasn't been fantastic. Kentucky was one of his worst games. Here's what I'll say about the Kentucky game. He did not turn over the ball, and in crunch time, he made throws that mattered and helped them win the game. Those are things you want out of your starting quarterback. So maybe Carson Beck's not quite a superstar, but he is a really good quarterback. Who was another guy who people were pointing to, well, that's going to be a superstar? Trevor Etienne, running back. Well, he's played 2 games for Georgia. He had 17 carries for 80-ish yards. I can't remember the exact number, but he had 17 carries for 80 yards, I think. Against Kentucky, it was in that ballpark range. But he could, he had 1 or 2 explosive runs. Obviously, one that ended up leading to a touchdown a handful of plays later. He had a really big run against Tennessee Tech. Didn't play against Clemson. We still don't really know how good Trevor Etienne is going to be for Georgia. We haven't seen when the offense has just opened up. We haven't seen what Trevor Etienne is. And then 2.5, Dominic Lovett, wide receiver. Right, that was kind of the guy. Because of what happened in spring practice, he played really well. Kirby talked about how he dominated, and he looked good at G-Day, I'll tell you that. And we've seen it on film, and he's been around the SEC for a few years. People pointed at him. Well, he had a pretty solid game against Kentucky. He had a couple of big catches, but Georgia has been spreading the ball around so much, and there hasn't been the truth is Dominic Lovett hasn't been a number 1 target, and there hasn't been a number 1 target on this Georgia football team necessarily. So I don't think that you can say that he replaces that completely. Something that Nick Saban said when NFL GMs were calling him. They asked who, and I can't remember exactly who this is. I think this was a conversation with the Giants front office. But they were asking, who gave you problems? And he said 2 guys gave Alabama problems. Brock Bowers and Malik Neighbors. Well, look at them. Both balling out in the NFL right now, rightfully so. But Brock Bowers was huge in these Alabama games. In the game that Georgia lost in the SEC Championship in 2021, where Alabama kind of blew the game open, Brock Bowers' his freshman year, he balled out 130-plus yards and a touchdown. Maybe it might have been 2 touchdowns, 10 catches. He balled out. He had a lot of big plays. He had a touchdown late in the 4th quarter against Alabama a few weeks later in the national championship. He scored a touchdown in almost every playoff game. I think the Ohio State game was the only playoff game in which he didn't score a touchdown. And think about who else was on that team in 2021. A.D. Mitchell, George Pickens, James Cook, a lot of NFL talent. I'm not convinced that Georgia has as much of that right now on offense, at least after we've watched it for a few weeks. I do think things are going to get better for Georgia. I think that Kentucky was a little fluky, the way that game ended up out there. I think that sometimes you can get in your head about an opponent and just play worse. And I think it just happens to Georgia sometimes. And I think that this is an example of that. And of course, hey, next week, got Alabama on the docket. I think that can lend itself to worse football play. But I think that Georgia's offense is not as obviously. I mean, you saw how it played against Tennessee Tech and Clemson. It's not as bad as what you saw against Kentucky, but I don't know if it's as good as what I thought and what the national media thought heading into this season. I picked Georgia to win this game. I think it's going to be an extremely close game. I think that I'm not extremely confident about it. Like, this is almost a coin flip type of game for me. And I understand why you think. Part of me thinks Alabama's going to win. My concerns with Georgia don't have to do with the defensive side of the ball. Is Georgia going to be able to score enough against a team that is extremely explosive in Alabama? Kirby Smart outlined how good they are at explosive plays. I talked about that with you guys earlier this week. But can Carson Beck keep high-level play throughout 4 quarters? Can Trevor Etienne find some holes? Can Branson Robinson find some holes? Does Nate Frazier get out there? Who is going to step up and be a weapon that Alabama just can't stop? Because at the end of the day, in these high-level games, the teams with the NFL talent on the outside are the ones that do better. And I've said that over and over. Thanks for watching. Ryan Kelly from Dawg Post. Appreciate it.